So too tonight, do not read ahead. I want to introduce us to two characters. One you've all heard of. One only some of you have ever encountered before. But I would like for us to look at both of these two women in a way that maybe we never have before. This is a story, a very strange story that many people don't associate with Judaism at all, or with Jewish thought, and many people know very little about. As I said, a story of she-demons and man-eaters. There is in our tradition, I would say, a fairly little-known tale of a woman named Lilith. This is a winged creature of the most violent and hypersexualized sort, who swoops into homes in the middle of the night and compels good, decent, pious men to do all kinds of things that they don't want to do. This is an evil, demonic creature who, if you don't watch your children carefully, will take your babies to replace her own. This is a person whom, if you are pregnant, you need to watch out for, because she, in a fit of rage and jealousy, just might try to take your fetus and maybe your life as well. When I say she's little known, she has actually been around since the book of Isaiah, but she's not someone that for some reason we like to talk about very much in pleasant company. And so we whisper about her, but we don't often talk about her out loud. So tonight I want to unpack a little bit of the myth, the story of this Lilith creature, to try to understand who she is and why she was created by our tradition, what role she might play, and what that might teach us about women generally, and in particular about the rabbi's relationship with women, and how that might help us understand Eve better as we do this. Are we ready? Okay. I'll tell you that a lot of the learning around the Lilith creature is fairly X-rated. And so I have picked and chosen very carefully, because just in case any kids come in tomorrow and pick up the study sheet. So we're going to try to keep it clean, but a few times it veers toward the PG-13, so or maybe R. So you'll see. So the first time that this demonic creature appears is really in the book of Isaiah, as I said, and there she appears in a list of unclean animals. Okay, there are 8 unclean animals, and so if you look at the text from Isaiah, it's the second text down on the page. Her nobles shall be no more, nor shall kings be proclaimed there. All her princes are gone. It's a time of desolation and destruction. Her castles will be overgrown with thorns. I'm sorry, we're on the first page. Yeah. And I promise it will be more fun if we read it together. Okay, we're on the first page, just the second text, which comes from the prophet Isaiah. Does everyone see where we are? Yes. Okay, and can you still hear me? We're good? Yes. Okay. Yes, I'm reading from Isaiah. Okay. She shall become an abode for jackals and a haunt for ostriches. Wildcats shall meet with desert beasts. Satyrs shall call to one another. There shall the Lilith repose and find for herself a place to rest. Now, this word Lilith is what's called a hapex legomenon. It means that it only appears one time in the entire Tanakh. So that means that we can get really creative in trying to understand what in the world this creature is that would find repose in this place of desolation and thistles and wild animals and wild creatures. And so this is the first hint that there is something, that there's something brewing in the imagination, in the Jewish imagination, even several thousand years before, that nobody has a full or complete grasp on, and that is something of a mystery. So our job is going to be, starting with the clue that comes from the prophet Isaiah, to try to understand what this Lilith creature might actually be. What we learn from midrashic sources, from rabbinic interpretive sources, that really begin after the first exile, after the Babylonian exile in the year 586 BCE, but then begin in great earnest after the exile in the year 70 CE. what we start to learn about this creature Lilith is that she is a person who has two primary characteristics, okay? The first is that she is the incarnation of lust and lasciviousness in the world. And as I said earlier, one who will arouse men in their sleep and lead them astray. The second, see how convenient that might be, right? The mythical imaginary creature who is responsible for men's bad behavior. The second characteristic of the Lilith that emerges from our text is that she is, as I said, a child killer and a baby stealer and a witch. And all of these things come together. That she is a person, that she is a person who ought to be feared and awed in some ways, okay? We see at the very first text at the top of the page, which comes from the Babylonian Talmud from Masechet Nida. It says, Lilith is a demoness with a human appearance except for her wings. We also learn in the Talmud that Lilith is a very hairy woman. She has never cut her hair, and so she allows her hair to grow. I'm not sure why that's relevant, but it is one of the few facts that we learn about Lilith. So here we have this very evil, very hostile, very wicked, very sexual creature who is part human but not all human. And our job is going to be to try to figure out why. Okay. The very fact that there is one Jewish mythical creature that embodies so much of what is to be feared and what is ugly in social realms is something that I think is very interesting for us. So the question is, what sparked the creation of this very dangerous creature in the world? Now we can, oh, thank you. Is that better? Okay, good. Now I won't lose my voice by the end of our time together. So part of the question we have to ask is, what would a character, a biblical character, have to do in order to merit several thousands of years of the heaping of responsibility for some really terrible and tragic events in the social realm, okay? What we know is that Lilith is despised. We know that she is a hostile and very dangerous creature, but we don't yet know why. We don't know why until around the 10th or 11th century, when a text comes out called the Alphabet of Ben Sira. So the idea of Lilith for many thousands of years is in the air. It's something that women whisper about and men write about, but we don't ever have a backstory. And then the Alphabet of Ben Sira, this very strange text, which is considered midrash, rabbinic interpretation, but is not something that you'll probably find on most rabbis' bookshelves. The Alphabet of Ben Sira comes out and tells us the following. After the Holy One created the first human being, Adam, or Adam, God said, it's not good for Adam to be alone. Lo tov heyot Adam levado. So God created woman also from the earth and called her Lilith. Okay? They fought immediately. She said, here's the rated R part, I will not be on the bottom, okay? And he said, well, I will not be on the bottom, but I will be above you. For you are fit to be below me, and I am fit to be above you. Okay? They don't teach you this in a religious school. She responded, we are both equal because we both come from the earth. Neither of them listened to one another. When Lilith realized what was happening, she pronounced the ineffable name of God, and she flew off into the air. Okay, so first let's just take a couple of steps back, and then we'll continue the midrash. So what is, and I really want for this to be a conversation, because as I said last year with Sarah Barasher, with some of these more obscure characters, we are actually, we are like detectives now. So we're trying to figure out together what's actually going on here. So what is the Alphabet of Ben Sira arguing is what prompts the mythology of Lilith. Do you have an idea?
Yeah, they desire equality.
Okay.
It's liberation of biblical times.
Okay, so the first thing is that what the alphabet of Ansira is responding to, and what we have to imagine has been part of the rabbinic imagination for many years before that, is that we have a problem in our text. We have a problem that comes almost immediately as soon as the Torah starts. We read it last week, which is that we have two different creation stories. There's one creation story that happens in the first chapter of the book of Bereshit, of the book of Genesis. And then there's a very different creation story that comes in the second chapter of the book of Bereshit. Okay? So turn your page for a moment to page 2. Did everybody get a copy, by the way? Do we have enough? Are there extras sitting in the back over there? Oh, great. Thank you. Okay, so let's look for a moment at the text that's on page 2. Can somebody read the pasuk, the verse at the top of the page for us, loudly, please? Okay, great. And can you translate that for us too?
He created Adam in God's image, and in the image of God he created. He was created male and female, but God created both male and female there.
Right, okay. So we see already that there's a problem. We don't even need a second story in order to find a problem. We have a problem already even in the first story, even in the first verse. This is the sixth day of creation, the creation of human beings, and it's extremely confusing, right? Because God creates this creature called Adam in the image of God, and this singular person was created in the image of God, but then it says male and female God created them. Which, so I'm sure many of you have thought about this, contemplated, studied, heard stories about this before, but it is quite confusing. And it doesn't seem that it is an accident or an editorial error, but actually that there's something deliberate going on here that the text is trying to communicate to us, but it is quite puzzling what it is. Did you have a comment?
I had a comment that most Israelis that studied there, we study it as history or whatever we study, nobody knows about it.
Ah, okay.
It's almost not, the Lilith is like it's what, just Adam and Eve.
Okay, so that's very interesting. So I would say, by the way, that's not only Israelis. I would say it's also, as I said, partially because of the rated R nature of Lilith. We don't talk about her in religious school, but it's also, I mean, it's very confusing stuff.
Why do you call her a creature?
This creature, because they turn her from woman into the rabbis. Right? Over the course of the past several thousand years, she's been transformed from a woman, one individual human being, to a prototypical woman or a creature that is part human, part non-human, who lives not only in the time of Adam, but who lives throughout time. Okay, that meaning you will still today, and some of you may be familiar with this, but you'll still see in certain communities that when a woman is pregnant, that she wears an amulet, or when somebody, when somebody has given birth, they put over the baby's like bassinet or crib, they'll put little amulet stones to keep away the spirit of Lilith. Right? She's alive and well, thousands of years after Adam disappeared. Okay, yes.
Is it possible that the second creation story is like a midrash on the first?
Okay, great question. And I think some people do try to read it this way, right? We didn't get to the second yet. We'll come back to it in a moment. Yes?
I was just thinking of the red string that also is more.
Ah, okay. Is that also because of Lilith?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so the comment was, and if you could just say your names, please, as you speak, it would be helpful. The comment was that some pregnant women wear a red string around their hands, and that is also about the idea of getting rid of the spirit or keeping away the spirit of Lilith. When you're in a vulnerable moment. Okay, so the first thing to know is that the first version of the creation story of human beings is extremely complicated because God creates Adam, Harishon, one, but that one is both male and female, and then it says God creates Otam, them, right? Not singular but plural. And as I'm sure some of you are familiar with, it has been pointed out many times that this idea, this what we consider to be kind of a Platonic idea of an androgynous being that holds both male and female in one, is actually, some people say, originates from this line from the Torah, okay? That this Adam Harishon, and I call him Adam instead of Adam, because Adam, for the Americans in the room, we associate Adam with the man and Eve with the woman. But Adam is this creature that predates Adam actually becoming Adam. He's just Adam back then. He's he and she in this moment, and it's very confusing. So this is what the rabbis are coming to try to address, okay? Now, the second creation story happens in chapter 2. Right after Shabbos, then we go back and we tell the following story. And I'm going to ask you to just skip down to where where the translation is in italics. It's around verse 21. We're on page 2, right in the middle. Genesis chapter 2. And we'll come back to this in a little bit, and we'll be able to read this very closely. But I want to just put the idea out there first so we understand the alphabet of Ben Sira. So the first version is God creates an androgynous being who is both male and female at the same time in God's own image. That's creation story number 1. Creation story number 2, and the Lord God made Adam, or Adam, fall into a deep sleep, and he slept. And God took one from his ribs and closed up the flesh, and the rib which the Lord God had taken from man made a woman and brought her to the man. And Adam said, "This time she is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She will be called woman, Isha, because she was taken out of man, Ish." And this is why a man leaves his parents and tries to find a wife, and they become one flesh, okay? The second story is not about one being that is both male and female. The second story is about a being who is created that is male, but he's lonely. And God feels sad for him and decides that it would be a good thing for this creature to have a companion in the world. And therefore takes a piece of Adam out, and from Adam creates another creature, which is Eve, okay? This is the textual problem or inconsistency that birthed the myth or the narrative of Lilith that we're going to be exploring tonight. How can it be that both of these things are the case, that there is both Genesis 1 and that there is Genesis 2? Some people say Eve 1 and Eve 2. And tonight we're going to say Lilith and Eve. And there's a tiny little hint of this even that you may have noticed in the language. The name Lilith is never used in the Torah, actually. Only again appearing one time in the entire Tanakh, and that's much later in Isaiah. But he does say, if you look at the beginning of verse 23, he says, Zot hapam, this time, she is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. What was she last time? Yeah. The first time around, the woman character was created by God from the earth, just as the male character was. The second time around, the woman character was created from Adam, right? By God, but through Adam, from Adam's own body. So I want to go back now to the alphabet of Ben Sira. Ben Sira says that what actually was going on in this case, if you go back to page 1 now for a moment. Okay. So now we know that something actually happened between chapter 1 and chapter 2 that the Torah is not telling us about. Now we could read it, as you suggest, that the story that's told in chapter 2 is just is either a midrash or a commentary or some lengthier, more detailed explanation of what happens in chapter 1. It can absolutely be read that way, and it is read that way by some people, right? But part of what I love so much about Torah study, and part of what I think has actually kept the Jewish people alive for so many years, is that we don't take anything for granted that appears in the text, right? So when we see a textual inconsistency, we create worlds out of it. When we see a redundancy or something that appears to be a repetition, now some people will say, well, it was sloppily edited. Someone should have cut that out. And other people will say, Everything that appears there for a reason. Right? So you may remember that Rabbi Akiva once said that every single crown on every letter of the Torah comes to teach us something. So the rabbis, some people will say, okay, it's a midrash. This is a lengthier explanation or commentary to what happened in chapter 1. Other people will say, no, there's a reason that there's an inconsistency. If we're smart enough to catch it, then we can create worlds with it. Yes?
If they're both created from the earth, then they're both equal. If she is created from him, does that make her subservient to him? And the books are written by the men, and so they like it better that way?
And we're done. Thank you very much, and enjoy your drive home. Okay, the Skirball Bridge may be closed on your way out. Yes. So, and your name?
I'm Joy.
Joy. Okay, thank you. So yes, we're gonna come to all of this, right? So the assumption of the alphabet of Ben Sira is exactly as Joy suggests, which is, if God creates these two creatures, both of them from the earth, then they are fundamentally equal. That doesn't mean everybody's gonna like how fundamentally equal they are, okay? And so what he imagines is, or what he articulates, depending on how you understand how Midrash is born, what Ben Sira actually imagines is that there is this dispute that happens between these two equal creatures, right? He's not a contemporary feminist thinker who's saying, wait a minute, they're actually equal. It says in the text that they were created, male and female, God created them together. So, and so he says, they are fundamentally equal. But Adam tries to take up more space than Lilith, and Lilith won't stand for it. And so what Lilith says is, I protest. I will not be treated as lesser than you, because we are actually fundamentally equal. Now, maybe if you really were superior, then I would understand that that's my place in the world, but you are not. And so we are fundamentally equal, and I insist that you treat me that way. And he would not agree to it. Lilith, at a certain point in her wisdom, or perhaps her insanity, realized that she couldn't ever change Adam. And she decides that, therefore, she would rather leave paradise and find her way alone in the world, right? She would rather leave this place where every single need is taken care of for her, where they are in daily contact with God, where they have abundance of all good things in the world, but where she feels diminished as a human being by her partner, who doesn't see her as a partner but sees her as subservient. And so she flies away. First, she pronounces the ineffable name of God, and I just want to take a moment to say this because I don't know if everybody's familiar with this, but there is a sense that God's name, which runs throughout our tradition, that God's name holds with it such a profound holiness that when the name is uttered in the world, it has a kind of almost magical reverberation. So much so that we purposely forgot how to pronounce the name, right? Because it was too dangerous. And we didn't want the wrong people to get their hands on it. And so we stopped using the name, and people were prohibited from saying the name. It used to be that on the holiest day of the year, in the holiest place in the world, the holiest person alive, the Kohen Gadol, would go in on Yom Kippur in Jerusalem and utter the name. But we don't know the name anymore. Now we say Yud Hey Vav Hey, and we pronounce it as something that doesn't sound anything like what those letters would sound like if they were put together. Some people say Hashem because they don't even want to say the way that we mispronounce purposely the Yud Hey Vav Hey. Some people don't even want to say Hashem. We say in English, we say God, and some people don't even want to write G-O-D, even though that has nothing to do with the ineffable name. And so they say G-D or G-D, and all of this is fine. I mean, I remember many years ago, Rabbi Dorf in rabbinical school said he finds that to be unctuous because it's really, you can't write G-O-D on a piece of paper. That has nothing to do with God's name. I think it's fine because what it reflects is that there's still a sensitivity to the fact that words actually have power, and we ought to be careful with them. But there has always been a sense in our tradition that, that uttering God's name would give you the capacity or the ability to do extraordinary things and could have very painful and very powerful echoes and reverberations in the world. When Lilith utters this name, which is to many people a signifier that Lilith had extraordinary spiritual power because she actually had access to the name, she grows wings and is able to fly away. Okay. Now that's the primary part I want us to focus on. But we're going to go back just to finish reading from the alphabet of Ben Sira to see what happens after Lilith flies away, because you might imagine that Adam is somewhat relieved maybe because this difficult woman has disappeared. But then it's dinner time and he doesn't have anybody to prepare dinner for him, and so he gets very frustrated and upset. And he goes to God and pray. Lilith wasn't cooking for him anyway, I can say that really. But that night he felt it in a different way than he ever did before. He goes up before the Creator, saying, "The woman you gave me has fled from me," as if God didn't already know that. And the Holy One, according to Ben Sira, okay, the Holy One sends 3 angels to go catch Lilith. The Holy One then says to Adam, if she wants to come back, all the better. If not, she will have to accept that 100 of her children will die every day. Now, you might want to know who God is after reading this, right? What is going on between... First of all, in the mind of Ben Sira, God is clearly male as much as Adam is male, okay? But God is, in this case, a deity that is willing to punish a woman for fighting for her equality and freedom in the worst and most awful way that you could punish a woman, which is by harming her children, right? While we might be stuck on the point of how could she have 100 children a day, how could she? But I think the important point is the worst possible thing that could ever happen to a mother will happen to her again and again and again if she doesn't come back. She can make the choice, right? But that's what will happen to her. And another day we can talk about theology and talk about who this God might be. But in the mindset of this midrash, it's that kind of God, okay? So these 3 angels go after Lilith, and they find her, and she's in the sea, in the powerful waters in which the Egyptians were destined one day to perish. Now remember, there are no Jews and there are no Egyptians yet. This is just Adam and Lilith, the first 2 creatures in the world. But she flies to the Red Sea. That's where she chooses to go. And the 3 angels told her what God had said, and she decided she didn't want to come back. Even with all that pain, she wasn't going to go back and be subservient to Adam. She couldn't live like that. Okay, so first of all, I would like to take a moment and hear, and I suspect that even people who've heard of Lilith may not have seen the text in its entirety before. So let's hear like 2 reactions if somebody has a burning reaction or comment or question. And please, again, introduce yourselves first.
And it doesn't seem like she stays very long. You don't know. I don't know how long a period of time they were actually together.
Okay.
It sounds like they meet each other, they start fighting immediately, and then she's off.
Okay, so Mimi makes an interesting point. Did all of this happen on the 6th day? Was this just one bad day? They went on a first date, and they said, forget it, we have no future together, I'm out of here. Should she have tried a little bit longer to work this out? Sometimes you have to say things a few times to men for them to understand what you're trying to say. Right? No. That was a joke. Any man? How could she what?
She flew away.
Yes.
And how did she have kids?
So who does she have kids with, right?
Yeah.
There's only one man in the world. It's Adam. Who does she have all these hundreds of children with?
His own children?
It's a very good question. It's not these. So according to, if she actually leaves him, these are not his children. By the way, I just want to tell you that some traditions have it flipped, that Adam and Eve separate at one point, and he finds Lilith, and for 130 years, Adam and Eve are separated, and he rediscovers Lilith, and they end up having a lot of children together. Okay, but that's we're not going to follow this thread. I had to choose carefully our thread because our time is limited. Okay, so one more comment.
Maybe I'm missing something here, but
Will you introduce yourself?
oh yeah, sorry, maybe you asked my question. I don't want people to know.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, I'm Janice. One thing that I find disturbing, and I guess perhaps I'm oversimplifying it, is if Lilith takes off because she's not considered an equal, then why doesn't God, or whoever we conceive him to be without demeaning, why does he not say to Adam, well, you gotta treat her equal? I mean, instead of just going out and, create a woman that's gonna be subservient.
Right, okay, so our,
Too simple.
no, this is a great, did everyone hear Janice's question? Okay, no, it's a great question. So she says, if God created these two human beings equally, and one of them asserts or affirms her equality, and therefore has to leave home, why doesn't God say to Adam, get it together, go after her, make it better, right? You can do better than that, she's actually right. Why doesn't God do that, right? And I mean, so I will leave that as an open question for us, because I have to tell you, I don't understand what drives this God either. Right, the God of the, and this will this is going to be a running consistent thread throughout the evening tonight, okay? Because I'm going to introduce you to some of the most disturbing and problematic pieces of our tradition, and I hope you're still going to come back next week, because I heard Rabbi Artzin's teaching, so you don't want to miss it. But I do, this is, I mean, we can create a very cleaned up version of our tradition where we're only talking about love your neighbor as yourself. This stuff is very complicated. It has an image of God that is deeply problematic. It has an understanding of women and femininity and motherhood that's deeply problematic. And it has an understanding of gender relationships that I think is problematic. So I want for us to confront it and to talk through it. And if you make it to the end, I think we'll feel better than we will when we're on the journey. Okay? All right. So that's the alphabet of Ben Sira, which, as I said, comes in order to address what is really a textual problematic or a problematic textual. A textual problem or inconsistency that appears between the two creation narratives, between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. And what I want for us to understand is that Lilith, who is created equally and simultaneously to Adam, and insists on being treated as equal to Adam, is read as evil and destructive and demonic by our tradition. There's no other explanation that I've been able to find as to why Lilith is associated with this evil and demonic and violent behavior, okay? The alphabet of Ben Sira was the first time that there was an explanation as to the origin story of this creature. So I think that's important to know. Now, how could we have read it? Well, we could have read it the way that Janice read it, and the way that I'm sure many people in the room read this, which is there is a very powerful female creature, human being, who radiates strength and assertiveness, and who refuses to submit herself to a system that seems to her fundamentally unfair. So this could have been, from the beginning, about a demand for equality, which was actually upheld and affirmed by our tradition. But instead, it led to demonization. And it basically said, throughout the ages, the story of Lilith was, beware of a woman who asserts herself. Now, where else in our tradition do we see the same warning writ large? Okay, so where else, think about Purim for a moment. Right? I'm not thinking of Esther, but that's good because I'm thinking about Vashti, who I grew up thinking Vashti was evil, and then literally as a grown-up in rabbinical school, actually read Megillat Esther as a grown-up and said, what did she do that was so evil? Right? Her husband asked her to come before all of his drunk friends, naked, and dance, and she said, no, that's disrespectful. She said, I'm in the middle of writing my doctoral dissertation on traffic solutions in Los Angeles. I don't have time for that, and it's demeaning. And so what happens to her? So she gets sent out of the kingdom, and there's an edict that all women are to be reminded that they are subservient to men, right? And the way that we tell the story is that really Vashti was wicked and evil, even though that's not what the story actually says. I mean, I think I don't know if it's like that in Israel too. I don't know if there's this sort of sense of Vashti, but I certainly grew up that way, and most people I talk to have a sense that Vashti was wicked in some way because she was defiant. It happened in the 60s and 70s that women's defiance became of interest to a lot of people, particularly women scholars who were interested in trying to figure out if there were counter traditions in what appeared to be a really patriarchal culture and tradition that might be empowering for women who really wanted to find their voice and find their place in the tradition. As this interest was burgeoning, so Lilith was rediscovered. And what many feminists, early feminists, found about Lilith was that she actually she really was a symbol of women's empowerment. That women and men are fundamentally created equally, and that what we need to do is find our voices and just ask. We're not asking to be better than anyone. We're just asking to be equal. Okay. I want to bring out one other point about yes. Go ahead.
I'm not so familiar with the midrash that you're reading. But the part that you read from Breshit, the first sentence from the first chapter, and then the later part, and I don't know Hebrew well enough to know if it's talking about bodies, but might it not just be talking about a creature that's balanced male and female, like the Sphirot have male and female aspects because God is both male and female? Might it not be talking about maybe not about their physical bodies, but it talks about them?
That's really interesting.
Hebrew is very special in the way it says certain words.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. The way that the rabbis talk about it is that literally it's the androgynous creature, that it's a body thing. But I think that's a very interesting read. Yeah.
I have trouble understanding this because if we're talking about Lilith's asserting equality, it doesn't read this. What she's asserting is dominance. Because she doesn't say, we're going to switch off. You know, sometimes I'll be below, sometimes you're on top. That she makes it very clear that she will always have she wants the dominant position.
Well,
Adam makes it clear
that he wants it. Okay.
that he wants it, and she says, no, that's not the way it's going to be. And it doesn't seem to be any marriage.
Okay. So what the text actually says is that Lilith says, "I will not be beneath you." Right? I will not lie beneath you. So that doesn't mean I insist that I have dominance over you, but I will not have you have dominance over me. Right? So maybe we can be creative and think of some other ways to make this happen, right? So I hear your point. I mean, she's not. I don't believe that she's asserting dominance, but she is rejecting submission. Okay. Yes. Last question, and then I want to make sure we go on. Okay. So Miriam said that she learned that there was no sex until Eve took the first bite of the apple. And I'll tell you, there's a very interesting midrash that I read today that actually says that Adam and Eve had sex the moment before. That's why, where was Adam when Eve went to go talk to the snake? Right? He was sleeping because they just had sex and he fell asleep. This is an actual midrash. This is not, I'm not writing this story, right? But it's not impossible to imagine. And Eve's like, okay, what do I do now? It's like the middle of the afternoon, so she goes for a walk and then she meets the serpent and he entices her with she wants a snack. Okay, so, right, exactly, okay. Okay, so I just want to raise one other issue, and then what time do we go until? 9. Okay. All right. So I just want to raise one other point, which was actually brought out by Aviva Cantor, who's one of the women in I think in the early 70s who started to uncover Lilith. So what she actually argues is that Lilith is an exile invention. That, as I told you, the stories around Lilith started to emerge around after the Babylonian exile, and then really they emerged after the destruction of the Second Temple in exile. And what she says is that most of this midrash came in a time in which the Jewish people were under threat of extinction, and what the Jewish people really needed, was endurance, not distraction. Okay, so women were perceived, according to this read of history, which I think is, there's a good argument to be made here, that women were perceived to be enablers of Jewish continuity, right? Now this might be surprising to you, or you might argue against this, but the job of the woman was essentially to birth children, to feed and raise children so that they could go on to be good Jewish boys and girls and have their own babies, so that we could one day make it out of this exilic hell and make it home again. And so what happens when you have a woman who's not playing by the rules and who doesn't just want to get married when she's, in her late teens and start having as many children as she can so that she'll be able to help the Jewish people in their, in their task to survive in the long run, what happens is the continuity of the Jewish people is threatened. And so the argument has been made that part of what's going on with Lilith is that really the suggestion that there are two kinds of women. There are good Jewish girls who understand that their job in the world is to make lots of Jewish babies, and then there are Lilith kind of girls, who are the girls who try to distract you and take you away from what you're supposed to be doing in the world, who aren't interested in Jewish babies, right? Because if they were, they wouldn't have made the deal with the devil in the first place, that she would give up all of her children. What she's concerned about is her freedom. She wants to, she wants to be out in the world in a different way, and that was very threatening and very dangerous to the Jewish system. So goes this argument, which I think is an interesting one, and you're welcome to, we can argue about it later, but I want to make sure that we get to Eve as well, and then we can look at both. Okay, so let's move to Eve. She's it's also, I think, equally interesting stuff. Okay. Now, I don't know what images you have of Eve in your mind, but I can tell you that the rabbinic image of Eve is unfortunately not always the most pleasant. Okay? Now, she is considered the mother of all people, but there is a lot of negativity and a lot of ugliness that goes into the rabbinic interpretation of and understanding of who this person was. Okay, so let's dig in. Can somebody read the text that is in the beginning of our Who is Eve section? Let me see what page that is for you. Okay, so we're in the bottom of page 2. Go ahead, really loudly, please. Yes.
If I go and speak with Adam, I know that he will not listen to me. For it is difficult to lead a man away from his own mind. So I'll go and speak to Eve, for I know that she will listen to me, since women are light-headed and
True. No, just kidding. I just want to say, by the way, since you're going to be with Rabbi Artson next week, who's a very dear friend and teacher of mine also, there was a tikkun, a redemption for this midrash that Rabbi Artson wrote, which is one of my favorite of all of his great teachings, really one of my favorite teachings. It's about Parshat Vayera, when God calls to Abraham and says, Kachna et bincha yechidcha asher ahavta, take your son, your only son, the one you love, take him up the mountain and offer him as a sacrifice. So Rabbi Artson writes, about 10, 15 years ago, he says that God calls out to Sarah and says, Kachna et bincha, right? God says to Sarah, take your son, your only son, the one you love, bring him up the mountain. And Sarah says, who are you? Right? And God says, I'm God. Take your kid and sacrifice him. And Sarah says, no, you're not, because my God would never ask someone to sacrifice their own child. You're not God. You're some imposter, right? And so this is the tikkun, because in Rabbi Artson, in that rabbinic midrash, women, and then God, as he says, God shrugs God's shoulders and says, women, and walks away, and then goes to Abraham and says, Kachna bincha yechicha, and Abraham gets up early the next morning and saddles his ass and takes his kid right up the mountain. Okay, so I do feel that there's been some redemption for this midrash, which comes from Bereshit Rabbah, not a marginal or obscure rabbinic collection of interpretations, but actually really the central and core piece of our tradition. The serpent actually contemplates going to Adam, but realizes that Adam won't listen. But women, you can persuade them to do whatever you want to persuade them to do, because they are lightheaded and can be easily led by everyone. Okay, so you think that one's fun? Let's read the next one. Promise me you won't leave Judaism over these texts. So maybe I'll just read, because it seems like it's hard to hear if we don't have the mic. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. If you get tired of hearing my voice, you'll just tell me. Well, pass the mic. Okay, so Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says By what parable may what happened to Adam and Eve be illustrated, or even Adam be illustrated? By the parable of a man who had a wife at home. He went and brought a cask and put a certain number of figs and a certain number of nuts into the cask. Then he caught a scorpion, and for some reason he put it at the mouth of the cask, sealed the cask with a tight-fitting lid, and put it in the corner. My dear, he said, everything that I have in this house is yours except for this cask, which you may not touch at all because there's a scorpion in it. Okay? We don't know why he would do such a thing. When her husband left for the marketplace, an old woman came calling on her. And just imagine every Disney movie that's ever been made, right? Like those who drop in to borrow a little vinegar, says the Midrash. This is from Avot Rabbi Natan. The woman asked, how does your husband treat you? The wife replied, my husband treats me wonderfully. He's given me authority over everything he owns, except for this one cask. So the old woman says, very likely all his precious jewels are inside it. And he didn't tell you that because he intends to marry another woman and to give those jewels to her. So what did the wife do? She proceeded to open the cask and to put her hand into it, whereupon the scorpion stung her. She stepped back. She collapsed upon her couch. Okay, the husband comes home from the marketplace and says to her, what happened? She said, I put my hand in the cask and a scorpion stung me, now I'm dying. He says, but didn't I tell you in the beginning that everything in this house is in your hands except this cask, which you may not touch at all? He grew angry with her, and he no longer thought of her as his wife. Okay? That's the explanation. That is the equivalent in the rabbinic imagination to what happened to Eve. Right? Because you should know not to trust crazy old women who come to your house looking for vinegar or serpents. Right? Because those are precisely the kind of people who try to lead you astray. The conclusion is, and there, by the way that Midrash works is, and I don't know how much you've actually, you've studied of these things, there is no need for consistency in the tradition, right? So the fact that Avot Rabbi Natan says one thing does not mean that Bereshit Rabbah has to say the same thing. In this case, it happens to be that there are dozens and dozens of midrashim, of ancient rabbinic texts, 2,000 years old, that paint a very similar picture of Eve, which is that she's untrustworthy, and that unlike Lilith, she's docile, she's even a little bit dumb, okay? Because she's easily fooled. Because we have to create that image of her in order to understand how it could be that some serpent could convince this woman who has everything in the world but is told only there's one thing you can't have, so what would make her go for the one thing she's not supposed to have? Okay, very good. What's your name? Manuel. Okay, we're going to come to this. So this is the tradition doesn't say what Manuel says, essentially, right? But I do. Okay, so the picture that's being painted of Lilith is a woman who strives for equality because she's created with equality, and when she does, she turns into an evil, demonic warrior woman. Just one sec. Let me get the argument out. The image that is very frequently, but not entirely, you'll find a few nice things about Lilith, about Eve in the tradition. Not very many nice things about Lilith until the 70s. Is that Eve is a little bit of a dope, right? That she's easily taken advantage of, that she's not trustworthy, and it's going to get even worse in a moment. Now, if you can hold your question for 1 sec. But that's a rabbinic 1 sec, so it's going to be like 6 minutes, if you can. So now I want for us to go back into the text and look at what actually happened with the serpent and see if there's another way that this could have been read. Because there is a real thread throughout the Midrashim, throughout the rabbinic interpretations, that Eve is, as I just said. And yet I believe that it's absolutely possible to read the text and see something very different from that. So you should have on your sheet, right below is on page 3, is the text where the Hebrew starts that comes from Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 through 7. I'm going to quickly run through the story because I'm assuming that it's familiar to many people, and if not to all. So we'll read it, and if it's not familiar to you, you'll hear it now. The serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And the serpent said to the woman, has God said you shall not eat of every tree in the garden? The woman said to the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God did say, you shall not eat of it, nor shall you touch it, lest you die. Okay, which is all true so far. God did say that. Then the serpent said to the woman, surely you will not die. For God knows that the day that you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you'll be like gods, because you're actually going to know the difference between good and evil. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, which she only noticed after the serpent dismissed the idea that they would die from it and planted the seed of possibility that maybe God was trying to prevent them from acquiring this kind of wisdom. When she saw that it was good for food and it was a very attractive tree and a tree to be desired in order to make a person wise, so she actually took the fruit, she ate it, and she also gave of it to her husband who was with her, and he ate as well. And the eyes of both of them were opened, as the serpent suggested that they would be. And they realized in that moment that they were naked. And so they sewed fig leaves together and they made themselves aprons. Did they die right away? No. All right, so the serpent, we know this, so the serpent is in some ways telling the truth. Let me get this comment first and then this one. And I want to ask you to think about why it is that, given what we just read from the beginning of chapter 3, that the rabbis have the read of Eve that they do have. Yeah.
If Eve was constructed from Adam's bone, were they not more equal than Lilith, who was sent down? I mean, she was made from him. Ergo, were they not equal?
So it's an interesting question, and this is biblical science, right? So one could, the suggestion that comes from the tradition is that if two creatures are both created by the hand of God from the earth, from the dust of the earth themselves, that those are two who are fundamentally equal. If one is created first, and then as an afterthought or a second thought, another is created from the first, that the other one is secondary to the primary, which is Adam. So, but I'm totally open to the imaginings of it being the other way, okay? You could also say, we're from the same stuff, we're equal, right? You could make that argument. And one might say that the suggestion that that either Eve or Lilith should be submissive or secondary to Adam is ridiculous, right? We're all right. And are you unequal to your child or to your parent? Or we're all human beings at the end of the day, right? So you could certainly make that argument. But for the sake of this session and this trying to distinguish between Lilith and Eve, the assumption of the tradition is that when they're created together, both from scratch by the hand of God, they are fundamentally equal. When Eve comes out from Adam, the assumption is that differentiates between the two, so that he's the primary and she is the secondary human. Okay, and we're going to get a little bit more into this in a minute if we hopefully still have time. Yes.
My name's Sarah.
Hi.
In chapter 2, it says, and out of the ground God formed every beast of the field and every bird of the air and rock and tatter, you name them. And now we're talking about the nachash, the snake. Is not the snake created by God? Where does he get this knowledge to entice Eve to be naughty?
Yes. Yeah. No, that's great. Right. Is any of this out of the design of God? Right? Or did God want to create the conditions in which God's children could defeat God, so to speak, right? Which, of course, I'm referring to, something that happens much later in the Talmud, in which, God laughs and says, "My children have defeated me." Nitzchuni banai, right? God is like many of us as parents who love when our children outsmart us, even though we don't want our children to outsmart us. But it means that they've learned enough to figure it out. One of the branches of one of the trees in the garden actually extended out over the exit of the garden, and Eve climbed up to see what was going on the other side and saw Lilith over there. And they struck up a conversation, and they became girlfriends. They were really good friends. And so Eve, whenever Adam would fall asleep, would go talk to Lilith, because Lilith was so interesting. Right? She lived on the other side. She was free. She was like the cousin who made it away from the, yeah. Right, so, well, she went to the Dead Sea, to the Red Sea, not the Dead Sea, immediately after this experience happened. But, and again, Midrashim, they do not feel the need to be consistent, okay? Right.
Something else that contradicts the Midrash and what it says here. It says that he gave a husband to eat the apple from the tree after the snake gave it to her. He told her to eat it. I thought he was asleep because they had sex.
Well, he woke up and then he ate, right? Okay, so, but again, don't look for consistency in Midrash. That's what I'm saying. These are all rabbinic voices over the course of thousands of years that are reflecting aspects of the rabbinic tradition that will often contradict each other. Yes, Rhonda?
Seems to me she was very wise because she makes an assessment of the tree. She looks at it, she makes a determination that it looks good for food. And then instead of saying, here, I'll try it, so to see whether he dies, she eats it first, and then she determines that it's good.
Okay.
And she shares immediately with
This is great. Okay, this is very good. So I want to like jump off from what this is exactly where I would like to go, which is it could just as easily be that she is somewhat perhaps lonely, extremely curious, imaginative, perceptive, right? Because of see what she sees when she looks out at this tree, hungry, right?
Not dumb.
But not dumb, right? Not dumb at all. Hungry for knowledge of good and evil, right? As you suggest.
Why didn't she eat out of the tree of life first?
Ah, okay. So because she wasn't wise enough to do that yet. Okay. So but actually hungry for wisdom and hungry for knowledge. That Eve is a person, it could just as easily be, and I don't believe that this is some radical feminist rereading of the beginning of chapter 3, that Eve is a person who desires wisdom, who desires companionship more than anything else, and that her act of defiance, her act of rebellion against the rules is actually because she really wants to learn. Not unlike a 14-year-old girl named Malala who was just shot in the head because she wanted to learn, right? That maybe her great act of defiance against the legal structure that was established for her was that she had a hunger for a different kind of life, one in which she had access to wisdom and to understanding. The rabbis say that one of Eve's greatest sins, in addition to being lured into this by the serpent and eating herself, was that she then gave the fruit to Adam. Okay, and so now I want to go to what Rhonda's saying. So coercing him into violating the command. Now you know that it's a bad thing to violate a mitzvah yourself. It's even worse if you're going to then cause somebody else knowingly to violate a commandment. And so there is, we'll look very quickly at the bottom of page 3. Scarcely had she finished eating when she saw the angel of death before her, expecting, this is from another Midrashic collection actually, so expecting her end to come immediately, right? So she takes a bite of the fruit, she thinks she sees the angel of death before her. She thinks she's about to die, so she resolves to make Adam eat the forbidden fruit too, lest she die, he stays alive, he takes another wife. It would break her heart to know that another woman will have him. So, I don't know. God pulls the other rib out and makes another one. Okay, it required. Now look at how manipulative and cunning. We talk about how cunning the Nachash is. Look what this woman is willing to do. She cries and she makes lamentations to prevail upon Adam to take this step. Not yet satisfied, after Adam eats, she then gives the fruit to all the other living beings so that they too might be subject to death. If she has to die, they're all going to die. This is not a particularly attractive reflection on our mother of mothers, Eve, okay? One could read it like that, or one could read it as Rhonda did, which is that this is a person who took the risk first herself and realized it was both delicious and also had the special power of wisdom, and she wanted to share, right? She wanted to share the goodness that she had experienced. The other day, I kid you not, someone walked into services, this never happens to me, brought me a barrel of chocolate-covered pretzels, this big, right? And I literally thought, like, how can I mean, I want every person in this room to, to feast. I can't eat these chocolate-covered pretzels myself. That's how Eve felt about this fruit. It's this good. I don't want to eat it myself. I want to share this because it's that good. Okay, so that's another version. That's not the version that our tradition tends to focus on, but that is another possibility. Our tradition suggests that from birth, Eve is, and now I'm going back to your question, Sarah, about subservience. Oh no, I'm sorry, it wasn't Sarah. What is your name? Yeah. Nancy. To what Nancy's saying about how if she comes from his rib, does that mean that she's necessarily subservient? So the tradition assumes that yes, that she's secondary to his primary creation. But now I want to ask you to go back to page 1 for a moment. Then we're going to get to the really bad stuff. Then we're going to redeem it all, and then you're all going to go home. Okay. So go back. I'm sorry. To page 2. Page 2. So I want for us to look for a moment a little bit more closely at what happened in the part of the story that we didn't read before. If you look at verse 18. Okay, so God takes Adam, puts him into the garden to cultivate it and to keep it. You can eat of all the trees, but not of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Okay, so and then the Lord God said, and this is what I made reference to in the very beginning from the alphabet of Ben Sira, it is not good for man to be alone. I will make him a help to match him. Okay, what does anyone know the Hebrew words for this? This is an ezer kenegdo.
Against it.
Okay, very good. So, and what's your name? That's my. That's perfect. It's my daughter's name also. So an ezer kenegdo. Ezer is from the word help, Ezra, and neged is oppose or opposite something. So I want to invite us to think for a moment about what is actually going on in this creation story in which God realizes that it's not good for Adam to be alone. Put aside the Lilith thing for a moment, okay, and the fact that he had a first marriage that didn't go well and now he's looking for a second, right? He's alone, and God says, I don't want him to be alone. I want for him to have someone who will help him by opposing him. Okay? Someone who will help him by standing opposite him and actually opposing him. Now, we're not gonna read the whole thing together on page 4, but there is in the Talmud from Tractate Bava Metzia. So there is this story, this very interesting and very painful story of two men, Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, who are one another's chavruta, bar plukta, best friends, greatest opponents in study. Chavruta is the person who you study with. Bar plukta is the person who they're of equivalent intelligence to one another. Okay, and the idea of what happened between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, who had a very beautiful engagement with each other through the study of Torah, is that they would argue over every single point, and you'll see what actually happened. So I'm going to skip the very bizarre and somewhat sexual dynamic between the two of them. You can read about it on your own. But something happens where the two of them, they have a rough start in their relationship. And after many years of really trusting and loving engagement together, Rabbi Yochanan makes reference to who Reish Lakish was before he became a Torah scholar. Reish Lakish dies. And Rabbi Yochanan is plunged into deep grief. And so the rabbis say, oh my God, we have to do something to help Rabbi Yochanan. He hasn't come out. Shiva ended, 2 years ago, and he hasn't come out yet. He's in this horrible grief. We have to help him. And so what do? They send Eliezer ben Padat, who another rabbi, and they say, he's very smart. We will send him to Rabbi Yochanan, and he will sit with Rabbi Yochanan. They'll start to study Torah again together. Let Rabbi Yochanan get back into life again, right? And so I'll just tell you the story. You don't have to read it. If you can take it home and read it on your own. So Rabbi Eliezer ben Padat goes to Rabbi Yochanan, and he tries to engage him in the study of Torah. But here's the problem. Everything that Rabbi Yochanan says, Rabbi Eliezer ben Padat laughs hysterically. Like it's the best, it's so smart, you're so funny, you're hilarious, you're exactly right. Everything you're saying, here are 15 proofs to prove to you how right you are. And Rabbi Yochanan's going out of his mind. And finally he says to him, you came to replace Reish Lakish? You came to enliven me again through study? Reish Lakish didn't laugh at all my jokes. Reish Lakish didn't tell me I was brilliant and tell me all the ways that I was right. The reason I loved him is because every point I made, he would refute 24 times. And then I would have to refute his refutation. And we would argue and fight until the truth came. That's what love is, right? That's what an Ezer Kenegdo is. Someone who helps you by opposing you. And I think of my husband in this way, because literally, which is a nice thing, I guess. So it happens probably 90% of the time that we're walking to Shul on Shabbat morning, and David says, so what are you going to talk about? And so I tell him my sermon or Devar Torah or whatever I'm planning, and he says, no, you're not. You're not doing that. The people need something else. You're not going to give that sermon. And then I'm forced during the Haftarah to come, because that's when rabbis do all, everything. That's like the only break we get, really, in the service, to come up with another sermon. And whenever it happens, it's better than it would have been. It really is. I mean, it's a little bit disarming, and it's frustrating, and you feel like, oh my God, I don't know if it's going to come out the right way. It's always better, because he's right? And that's an Ezer Kenegdo, someone who says to you, you can do better than that. That's not what people need right now. They need something different from you. Or Adam, and this goes back to Mimi, yes, to your point earlier, which is, how long did Lilith actually stick around? Maybe she should have said, Adam, you can do better than this, right? You have the capacity to do better. And so in some ways, what I believe the Ezer Kenegdo is actually supposed to be is what Reish Lakish was to Rabbi Yochanan. Someone who's able to say, I will help you become a better version of yourself, not by laughing at all your jokes, and not by telling you all the time how beautiful and brilliant you are, but by actually opposing you. That's not the image of Eve that we usually think about, right? We talked about Eve as submissive, docile, a little bit dumb, a little bit dull, not somebody who was put into the world in order to be able to say to her partner, I want you to do better, I believe in you, I know you can do better, this isn't the best of you. It doesn't feel good to be on the receiving end of that, by the way, because we all want to be told, oh yes, that's perfect, that's exactly what you meant. No. Ultimately, I think, we know that that's actually what makes us better. Okay, so God created Eve in order to be Adam's Ezer Kenegdo, to help him by opposing him, and so, okay, so just another way in which who Eve actually was based on the text in Bereshit, in some way could be a very different picture from what we see from the rabbinic interpretation. Now, Eve and Lilith both were never seen simply as two people, as two women, but they're sort of the prototypical females. And that means that according to our options from the tradition, a woman is either vengeful, hostile, heartless, sexually inappropriate, demonic on one hand, or dopey, dull, and untrustworthy on the other, right? And so what I think that we are called to do, and why I'm glad that you all stayed till the end, is actually to, at some point, to say, I reject both of these reads, right? I reject both the demonic, vengeful succubus, and I reject the brainless, I can be convinced by anyone, including an old woman asking for vinegar, to violate, the fundamental rule of my household. Too often in rabbinics, we see that the rabbinic imagination paints women into a corner that I don't think most of the people in this room would want women to be painted into, whether you are a woman or a person who has ever had a mother, daughter, wife, sister, or female friend, okay? And what I think I will skip, or maybe just I'll reference, but not actually, we won't have to actually go into them, they're fairly painful. Is that there are a number of ways in which the creation story of woman, the creation of woman, actually makes space for men over the course of thousands of years to express their greatest fears and their deepest discomfort about who women actually are. And you sort of, I mean, I've many times read these texts and wondered what kind of fight did this man have to get into with his wife before he went to the Beit Midrash that day in order to write something like this. But there's some truly terrible stuff in here. And I think it's important for us to know. And I will give you, I'm going to give you, you know, we can pick one. Do you want Bereshit Rabbah 18 or 17? So you want 18? Okay, in spite of all of this, let's see. Which one is first here? Okay, so Rabbi Yehoshua of Sichnin said in Rabbi Levi's name. Okay, so God had to really think. Again, maybe I won't go through the whole thing, but we can just reference it, right? So God really had to think. Why the rib? We haven't talked about why the rib. So God thought, what part of Adam should I use in order to create Eve? What part of his body should I use? So God thought and said, well, I'm not going to use Adam's head because I don't want to create Eve into somebody who's swell-headed, okay? I don't want to take from Adam's eye because I don't want her to be a big flirt, right? I don't want to take from Adam's ear because I don't want Eve to become someone who's an eavesdropper. I don't want to take from Adam's mouth lest Eve become a big gossip. I don't want to take from Adam's heart lest she be prone to jealousy, nor from the hand, lest she be light-fingered, nor from the foot, lest she be a gadabout, but from the modest part of man. For even when he stands naked, this part of his body is covered, right? You can't see your rib, it's covered. So what God believes is that whatever part of Adam I create Eve from, that will become a significant part of her personality. I want her personality to be one of humility, so I will take from a very humble part of her body. So, and God then takes the rib and then crafts the rest of her and is whispering into her ear as each part is put together, be modest, be humble, be modest like the rib, okay? That's not so bad so far. Yet in spite all of this, but you have ignored all my counsel and heeded none of my reproof. I didn't create her from the head, said God, but she's still swell-headed. Nor from the eye, but she's still a flirt. Nor from the ear, but she's a total eavesdropper. Nor from the heart, and yet she is prone to jealousy. Nor from the hand, but she is light-fingered. Nor from the foot, yet she is a gadabout. I mean, we see the image of woman that is being portrayed in this narrative, in this midrash, is incredibly painful and really problematic, right? This is a text that was written by a person who's obviously, is struggling to understand why it is that women either are what he sees here or have certain kinds of power that he's uncomfortable with, so he needs to instead remind her that she really has all of these things in her and that's what should define her. The next one is also quite awful, maybe even worse. So we'll skip it. Now you're all going to be reading it instead of listening to my 1-minute conclusion. We could have just as easily read the narratives of both Lilith and Eve as narratives of equality, narratives of empowerment, narratives that God, in God's wisdom, was able to create not one but two creatures who both longed for companionship with God and with other human beings, and also longed for wisdom, which wouldn't be too terrible of a legacy for half of the population of human beings for all time to actually have. And I want to just prove to you that it's possible, that it would have been possible for that read to have been a part of to have been a much stronger voice in the way that our tradition has read these stories. Because you must look at this last piece, which comes from Masechet Sanhedrin. On the last page, we're on page 5. A heretic once said to Rabban Gamliel, "Your God," we have a lot of stories in the Talmud of Caesar or heretics challenging the rabbis and raising challenge to either who God was or to who the leadership of the Jewish people are. So a heretic once says to Rabban Gamliel, "Your God is a thief, for it is written, and the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam and took out one of his ribs." His daughter said, and we don't know, by the way, I've read various versions of this, if his daughter is the heretic's daughter or Rabban Gamliel's daughter, okay? So the ArtScroll says, by the way, I mean, the text itself doesn't say, it says his daughter, but the ArtScroll says it's the heretic's daughter, which might be. So, his daughter said, leave him to me, and I will answer this question, okay? Now, this is 2,000 years ago. This is a time in which women were, not in the same, they were, let me just put it this way, they weren't moderating presidential debates, okay? So this heretic challenges Rabbi Gamliel, the leader of the community, and says, your God is a thief, and his daughter says, leave him to me, I will answer this question. Send me a police officer, she says. Why do you need one, says the heretic. Because thieves came to us during the night, and they took a silver pitcher from us, but they left a gold one in its place. And the heretic responds, would that such a thief would come to us every day. And she says, was it not also Adam's gain, that he was deprived of a rib, but given instead a partner with whom to serve God? It could very well be read that way. Now, this appears in the Gemara. This is not an obscure 11th century midrashic collection that you won't find on my shelf, right? This is from the Talmud. And interestingly, a story told by men and recorded by men in the voice of a woman. It's the daughter who's the one who stands up and says, I read that story in chapter 3 also. And I don't see a conniving or lightheaded woman here. I see in this story a partner, really someone who can help serve God with Adam. So I want to just give you for a moment some praise for coming to these sessions on Thursday nights, for fighting traffic and fighting construction and coming up to this place to engage in a really holy act of rereading and revisiting and re-understanding who the women were who served as the foundation of our tradition's imagination of who women could be. And it seems to me that in some ways, this is what this class is actually about. It's about realizing that things aren't always what they have seemed. That the initial read, that the way that things have been read and interpreted in the past is not the way that they always must be read. And in some ways coming together and affirming the possibility that things could be different than they were or always have been. And it strikes me that in doing so, we actually redeem not only Lilith, this evil demonic monster who might have just been a woman who wanted the equality that she was given, and not only redeeming Eve, this dopey, dull woman who might have just been a person who was searching for wisdom and companionship, but we also redeem Adam. Because for Adam to be in relationship with either of these women, he had to have been pretty lucky, right, for my read. And we also redeem God. Because I don't believe that any of us are descendants of the Lilith or the Eve that I read in these texts, right? The gossip, eavesdropper, light-handed gadabouts. But rather, hopefully are, and will be, and will continue to raise the descendants of Eve and Lilith, who are smart and courageous and strong and very powerful and deeply loyal and respectful, even in our defiance, women and children of God. So thank you.